All right, so get this right. We are diving into, like, Christian liberty, but not just the broad strokes this time. We're getting specific.
Oh, yeah, buckle up. We're talking drinking, smoking, the stuff that can really get a conversation going, even among, church folks.
For real, it's like everyone's got an opinion on this stuff. And to spice things up even more, we're tossing in the whole social media angle.
Yeah.
Because, it's 2024, where's the fun without a little online drama?
Right. Like what used to be a personal choice is now like a public statement for the whole internet to dissect.
Exactly. And speaking of opinions, we found these excerpts on thickshades.com, and they really got us thinking. But, okay, before we go any further, let's lay down the ground rules, right? We're not here to tell anyone what to do or, declare what's right or wrong.
Definitely not. We're just here to unpack the arguments, look at why people land where they do on these issues. So you, dear listener, can make your own informed choices.
100%. So let's jump into it. This article we found, it kicks things off with surprise, surprise the Bible. Specifically what Paul had to say in, Corinthians and Romans.
Makes sense, right? Paul was dealing with similar stuff back in the day, even if the specifics were a little different. But what I find super interesting is how this Thick Shades piece really zones in on this idea of stumbling blocks.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. Because not everyone listening is, a theology major. What exactly do we mean when we're talking about stumbling blocks in this context?
So it's like this. Something might not be inherently wrong for you, but it could potentially lead someone else down a not-so-great path. It's not about judging the action itself so much as it's about, thinking about the ripple effects it might have, especially for someone who's, struggling in that area.
Okay, so, my Friday night glass of wine is probably ND for me.
Yeah.
But for someone battling alcoholism, it could be a huge trigger.
Exactly. Or think about someone who grew up with, a parent struggling with addiction. Something that seems totally harmless to you or me could bring back a lot of painful memories for them. This article actually uses that example of eating meat offered to idols. Huge deal in Paul's time, though. Not so much for us nowadays.
Yeah, back then it was a whole cultural statement. But the point is, even though Paul knew he was technically allowed to eat it, he was willing to give it up if it meant protecting someone else's faith.
And that leads us to this really important tension within Christian liberty, right? It's this balancing act of, our freedom in Christ versus the potential impact our choices have on our fellow believers, especially those who might be, more susceptible to stumbling.
And that's where things get tricky. Because, who are we to decide where that line is for someone else?
It's a conversation, for sure. But you know what? This source is super clear. It's not about being, judgmental. It's about, at its core, love and caring for other people. And get this, they take this whole thing and, catapult it straight into the 21st century because they bring up social media.
And it's whoa, everything changes when you throw social media into the mix.
Right. Totally. I mean, it's a whole other layer to this whole thing. Back in the day, what you did on a Friday night was your business. Now, it's content.
It's like you said, what was once a private choice is now potentially a public declaration.
And when you put it like that, it makes you think about how our actions, even the seemingly small ones, can impact our witness.
Right. It's not even just about whether something is inherently right or wrong anymore, but how it might be perceived by others.
Especially those who, maybe aren't walking the same path faith-wise. The source actually brings up that verse from Thessalonians, the one about avoiding even the appearance of evil.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And it really got me thinking. It's not even about whether you personally believe drinking or smoking is evil.
It's about how it comes across to that random person scrolling through their feed at 2 in the morning.
Exactly. And you know how it is online. People love to jump to conclusions, take things out of context.
It's a minefield out there.
Yeah.
So, okay, just to be super clear, we're not saying you have to become a saint overnight. No one's saying, give me your wine and your cigarettes. It's more about being mindful, being aware of the bigger picture.
Right. And always coming back to that idea of love. Remember that whole love your neighbor thing? It's not about what we can get away with, but how we can use our freedom to love others well. The article actually quotes Galatians 5:13. Something about not using our freedom as an excuse to indulge ourselves, but instead to serve each other in love.
Which honestly is a good word for every area of life, not just this stuff.
100%. It all comes down to that question. Is this about me or is this about something bigger?
Okay, so I got to be honest, this next part, I was not ready for this. We need to talk about the poem.
Right? Like out of left field, right? Who knew theological debates and poetry went together? But honestly, I kind of loved it. It brought a whole other dimension to the conversation, you know?
Me too. It's like it gets at the heart of that inner struggle,
Yeah.
that tension between like wanting to fully embrace our freedom, but also knowing our choices have a ripple effect.
Totally. And it circles back to this idea of reflection, right? Our actions, whether we intend them to or not, they're like a mirror reflecting like who we are, what we believe.
Oh, I love that. I even jotted down some lines from the poem. This one, for example, really hit me. Though lawful, not all things bring good. Will this stumble my brother if it could? It's so simple, but it's like, boom, mic drop.
Right. It's that reality check we all need sometimes. Just because we're allowed to do something doesn't mean it's always the best move, the most loving move.
Exactly. Oh, and this next line, it really made me think about the whole social media thing we've been unpacking. The world is watching the faith we profess. Our lives must honor nothing less. Man, talk about pressure.
Tell me about it. But, even though it feels like a lot of pressure, I also think there's something really freeing about acknowledging that we're not alone in this. Like, yeah, people are watching, but we're all in this together, figuring it out as we go. And maybe, just maybe, by trying our best to live out our faith authentically, even when it's messy, we can actually encourage and inspire others who are on a similar journey.
It really is like that whole more people are watching than you think kind of thing, you know?
Totally. It's like that old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Social media is like this huge platform, and it's on us to use it well.
Right. Not just to like rack up likes, but to actually reflect what we believe.
Absolutely. It's like, are we showing up with like love, grace, compassion, the stuff that's actually important?
The stuff at the core, for sure. Which I think brings us to the heart of this whole deep dive. If love really is the bottom line, like, how does that change your view on all this?
Ooh, good question. And honestly, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but it makes you think, right? Like about how you're living out your faith day to day.
And not just when it comes to, like, drinking or smoking, but everything.
Exactly. It's like Paul says,
Right.
we've been called to freedom, but how are we using it to serve ourselves or to serve others?
Yeah.
Tough questions.
Yeah. And tough to answer sometimes, but it's like you said earlier, sometimes just asking the questions is a step in the right direction.
For sure. And realizing, like, none of us have it all figured out. We're all just trying to figure this thing out as we go, you know?
One step at a time.
Exactly. But I truly believe it's a journey worth taking, one conversation, one choice at a time.
So well said. And on that note, we're going to leave you with this. What does it look like for you in your life to really put love first? Something to think about, and even better, something to, like, actually do. Thanks for being here for another deep dive.